DAU, welcome to the Dragonball Technique tier list. I'm DevilArtemis, and today we're ranking some of your favorite Dragonball techniques. Now, before we begin, we just want to establish some ground rules. These techniques are not going to be based off the individual using said techniques. We are just going to be judging them based off their effectiveness and how much utility they might have during combat or against the opponent. We also aren't placing them in any specific order. We are just ranking them by the tiers. If you guys want to rank along with the video, the link is in the pinned comment as well as the description box. But anyway, enough rambling, let's get going. Starting off with All Reliable, the Kamehameha. It's your basic energy wave, but it can be amplified to ridiculous levels. It's iconic, it's reliable, and I'm just gonna drop it in A tier. Next up, we have Namekian Fusion. Now, Fusion in general is OP. Regardless of what race is actually doing it, Fusion amplifies the user's power and it gives them the most supreme hacks that we've seen in the world of Dragon Ball. So for that, I'm gonna be dropping this in Z tier. Final Explosion. Okay, so here's the thing. It's definitely a flashy move, but considering that you end up dead, it might not be the most favorable technique to use, right? Because it's kind of like a one-time use kind of thing. So I wouldn't really put this in the higher tiers. I definitely drop this in D tier. And there is a very strong reason for that other than the death. You know, it's a technique that could be effective, but I'd argue that there are explosive waves that do not kill the user, and it accomplishes the same thing. The only thing that this one really has over the others, I would say, is the sheer size of the explosion. But yeah, other than that, D tier it is. Dodon Ray. Okay, so Dodon Ray is a finger beam. A lethal finger beam, but it's not the strongest of techniques. You know, I'm just gonna drop this one in E. The next one is called the Four Witches technique. Tien used this during Dragon Ball, and all it really did was just, it gives you extra arms. That's really it. You just get extra arms during combat. I don't think it's really that effective considering that you can lose said arms, and the arms don't really come with extra abilities either. They're just basic ass arms. So I'm dropping this one in F. Burning Attack. So Burning Attack is a very stylish attack. It seems like it doesn't take that long to set up, right? You just throw up a couple of gang signs, which is, it'll probably confuse your opponent, and then boom, explosion. It's simple, it's reliable. I'd argue that this belongs in C tier. You know, it's not gonna stand up against like a massive Kamehameha wave if that's coming your way, right? But it's still a reliable technique. Hellzone Grenade. I always thought that this was an amazing technique. It's hard to avoid, it has awesome utility, it can act as somewhat of a minefield to control space during a fight, or you can just straight up use it as an overwhelming barrage. Either way, it's a very useful technique, and I'd place this in B tier. Instant Transmission. So this has to be one of the most useful techniques in the Dragon Ball universe. The fact that Goku has used this to teleport across the cosmos, save his own life, save the life of others, its utility is just insane. It's quite possibly one of the fastest forms of mobility in the Dragon Ball universe. And I know for a fact it would help you avoid a lot of the techniques that you would see on this tier list. So for that, I drop it in Z tier, 100%. Gallic Gun. So Gallic Gun and Kamehameha are literally the same technique. We haven't seen Gallic Gun be amplified in the same way that Kamehameha has throughout Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, GT Super. I'd argue that it's just shy of A tier, like maybe a step under the Kamehameha wave, so B tier. Solar Flare. So this technique is very useful. Once you're hit with it, you are blind and you can't defend yourself. You are going to get either knocked out or one-shotted. So I'm going to drop this bad boy right here in C tier. Because there is still a risk of it not working, right? It could not be as effective if the person is wearing something over their face or if they're just hiding behind something. Maybe if they turn around, close their eyes, or just don't look, you know, the technique won't work. Final Flash. Okay, this move belongs in A tier, right next to the Kamehameha. We haven't seen it used that often, but we've seen what it can do and how strong this technique really is. A tier. Special Beam Cannon, as an attack alone, it's really good. The question is, can you charge the attack long enough to use it in an actual battle without help? Can you even hit your opponent in the first place? That's what kind of holds this back, you know, the ridiculous charge time. Not to say that you can't fire a special beam cannon with it barely being charged, right? Because we've seen Piccolo do that. but it's more effective the longer you charge it. For that, I'm going to drop it in D tier. Galactic Donuts. So this is a strange one. You know, the move itself just binds people, but you can also use multiple of them to encase someone in like a ball that explodes. Right, that's what the ultra charging boo boo volleyball attack is. It's just multiple galactic donuts encasing the target. It's a good move overall, but I think that there are other techniques that are more useful than this. I will drop this over in C tier. Super Ghost Kamikaze Attack. These ghosts explode on contact, and they fuck you up. It really doesn't get more simple than that. C tier. All right, so the next one I think is Flying. So flying in the Dragon Ball universe has its uses, right? But it's more like a fundamental technique that most of the Z fighters learn anyway, but it's not going to help you win a battle, right? It is useful to have, though. So I'd drop this in F. Destructo Disc. Man, this thing is such a dangerous technique. You're literally chucking saw blades. It's ridiculous. And also terrifying, because you can manually guide these saw blades. B tier. And we are back with Fusion. Now, we mentioned it before, fusions are broken as hell. This one is a bit different from the Namekian fusion because you still run the risk of messing up the actual dance, and then you're just useless for like 30 minutes. So if you do perform the dance correctly, it is the most broken technique in Dragon Ball. And for that, it belongs in Z tier. Tri-Beam is up next, and that is a cool technique. You are actually firing out your spirit essence, your life energy. There is a danger to using this technique because you can literally die, but I think there's less of a risk of death with using Tri-Beam compared to other techniques. So I wouldn't put it in D tier. I'd probably drop this in C tier. The Kaioken. Right, so the Kaioken is not a transformation, it is a technique, for those of you who might be confused, meaning anyone can learn Kaioken. Krillin, Tien, literally anyone. Using it comes with a cost, though. It does damage your body the higher multiples you go. It'll give you incredible speed, power, and you can even combine it with other abilities. Because of its usefulness, because of its potential utility, I'm going to drop this in B tier. Alright, so the next one is Nappa's finger eruption explosion thing. So, I'm not gonna lie, this is probably one of the best moves on this list. You're literally nuking something with two fingers. And I'm not talking about a tiny explosion either. You are wiping shit off the surface of the planet with this one. I don't understand Dragon Ball scaling sometimes, but this is a prime example of like a move that just does an insane amount of damage at a very early point in the series. Imagine Nappa just walking into the Leaf Village and just soloing the entire village with this one move. It's crazy. I'm gonna drop this one in A tier, 100%. Alright, next one is the Wolf Fang Fist. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be that guy, Yamcha, but this is just a normal physical attack. There's no actual wolf. Okay, you are a fraud. There is no claws. There is no slashes. Or even ki, for that matter. Okay, it's just a barrage of physical attacks. You should be ashamed, good sir. That is all it is. I'm sorry, Yamcha. It looks cool. It sounds cool, but I'm gonna drop it in F. So, I'm not really sure what to call this next one, but it's General Blue's psychic ability thingy, where he can just paralyze the opponent by looking at them. The bad thing about it is that it seems that if you're distracted or not focused on the opponent, the technique kind of just wears off, and it seems to only work on one person at a time. So, I'm just going to drop this in E tier. Next up, we have Piccolo's Explosive Demon Wave. Now, this move was used by both versions of Piccolo, and let me tell you, it does damage. I mean, this thing is on par with Nappa's finger explosion. I'd argue maybe even better. It wipes out entire cities. Piccolo used this to destroy the fucking moon, I'm pretty sure. It's just ridiculous. A tier. The next one is the paralyzing technique that I believe Guldo uses. I think that this is just a superior version of General Blue's psychic abilities. It seems that it can be used on more than one person, so that already makes it better than General Blue's technique in my opinion. I'm gonna place this right into D tier. Not sure really what to call the next one, but I'm just gonna call it Mouth Blast. You know, we've seen multiple characters in the series who are able to fire these beams out of their mouth. It's nothing new, but is it an effective technique? I'll tell you that there's at least a surprise factor to it, right? The last place that you expect an attack to come from is the person's mouth. and I don't see it being as damaging or as devastating as some of the other techniques on this list, but useful nonetheless. I will drop the Mouth Blast in C tier. Big Bang Attack. Okay, let me put it to you like this. If you've ever wanted to fling a bomb at somebody, first off, you're weird. Get help. Second, this is that technique. It's been shown off to be launched as a Ki Blast sometimes, other times it's like a blast wave. Either way that it's used, it's extremely powerful, so I'm dropping this right into B tier. Next up, we have Guldo's Time Stop. I don't know about you guys, but the ability to stop time is broken. The more you use it, the more exhausting it can be, but the fact that you can stop time, that has huge advantages. I'm dropping this at A. Light Grenade. So Piccolo used this against Cell, and he blasted away almost an entire island. This covers an extremely large area, and it's overall just super destructive. I'm going to be dropping this in B tier. Body Change. So Ginyu's Body Switch is a weird technique. Honestly, I think it can win you the battle, especially if your opponent is bigger and stronger than you, but at the same time, it can go wrong very quickly. Like we saw on the show, what if a bird or a fly or something gets in the way of your body change technique? You are basically at the mercy of whatever is in front of you. So for that, I drop this in D tier. Eraser Gun is up next, and in my opinion, I think Eraser Gun is just a Mouth Blast, so I can't really see a reason to separate it from the other Mouth Blast. I'm just gonna throw it into the same tier, into C tier. I don't know which one is stronger, so just to be fair, C tier. Crusher Ball. This is a small orb projectile that's thrown in the style of a volleyball. That's all it really is. It's not that special. It seems that it's very easy to avoid. This belongs in E tier. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. Next up, we have the Spirit Bomb. This might be a hot take, might not be. This technique is based off of two things. One, the amount of energy you have, and two, the amount of time you have to actually perform the technique. If you are in the middle of the desert, for example, in the middle of nowhere, not really too many plants or trees or life in general, it kind of makes the move useless. But let's say at the very least you only have, a few living things around you. The Spirit Bomb will be much weaker overall if you don't take the time to gather that energy in the first place. The technique leaves you wide open for an attack. Even Goku kind of struggled to make it strong enough to defeat villains like Frieza and Buu. So while it might be super effective, I'd argue that it's unreliable, and for that, I'm going to put it in D tier. Vegeta's Dirty Fireworks. Now, I've always found this move interesting. You point at something and it explodes. Not really sure how it works. Is the opponent detonating from within? The closest thing that I could really think of that was similar to this was Frieza's technique that he used to kill Krillin, and it just kind of looked like he sends in like some kind of invisible key ball that somehow detonates the person from within. So if your opponent can't even see something like this coming, I would say that this is a really good technique, and I'd even drop this in A tier. Energy Blast Barrage. This is just a barrage of Ki Blasts, and I mean, these can be used in so many ways, right? Let me not play it down, because whether you're firing it off in like wave form, ball form, it doesn't matter. This technique can get destructive really quickly. You can overwhelm one enemy, take out multiple enemies. You can even extinguish all life on a planet with this one. Honestly, I'm dropping this one in A tier. Next up, we have the Ki Blast Cannon. So this move doesn't really use Ki in the traditional way that we see it used in the series. It's more of like a force wave that kind of just launches the opponent back with immense force. But the only reason I think you'd use this is, what, to create space? I think honestly that this is useless. Unless like it's a world tournament, it doesn't seem to get the job done of killing or defeating or harming your opponent in any way. So for that, I'm dropping this in useless. Up next, we have Mafuba, the Evil Containment Wave. Now, assuming that you have a container with a seal, and assuming that you can actually aim and you manage to seal the person in said container, then you have a pretty solid technique. However, if the other person also knows the Mafuba technique, they can actually reverse it. So it's kind of risky. Also, the technique can kill you if it drains too much of your stamina. So there is that too. I'm dropping this in D tier. Godbind. This is a fairly new technique, I'd say, right? It locks your opponent in a paralyzed state. I guess it uses ki or like god ki, aura, whatever it is that you want to call it. What's crazy is that if the person is stronger than you, they can actually reverse it. And then you're in the bind. It's still a useful technique nonetheless, but for that I'm going to drop it in C tier. Rock, scissors, paper, or rock, paper, scissors, whatever it is, this is just like the Wolfang Fist situation. It's just a technique that's a rushdown attack. It's not really key-based, so I'd place this over in F tier. Next up, we have Ultra Instinct. Now, I don't see Mastered Ultra Instinct on this list, so I'm just going to assume that this is Ultra Instinct as a whole. This is broken. Yeah, I don't think I really need to explain why. This is basically peak. Next, we have Super Dragon Fist. Man, Wrath of the Dragon is a great movie. It's one of the final Dragon Ball Z movies that we had for that time. You know, go check it out if you haven't already. But anyway, blowing up into a giant kaiju-sized golden dragon is just, it's raw as hell. We're gonna drop this in A tier. Alright, so next up, we have Death Ball. And this, I'm kind of torn. It's either gonna go in Z tier, or it's gonna go in the useless category, right? It can go in Z tier because, I mean, it's blowing up a planet and it's definitely going to just kill your opponent if they can't survive in space. But you'll also die if you can't survive in space. Therefore, it would be a useless technique to use. You'll just be killing yourself, you know? So, assuming that you can survive in space, I would drop Death Ball in Z tier. Next up is Death Beam. Now, this is a super fatal move. And while it might be a really good move, it's easily countered, and I think it's easily dodged, right? So I drop Death Beam in C tier. Right, so for this next one, I'm not really sure what technique this is. I just count it, I guess, as having a monkey tail. So here's the thing about it, right? You can use your monkey tail for multiple purposes. You can use it for fishing, for flying, apparently, right? But then you risk the whole transforming part of it. Every full moon, you go into full monkey, right? You have absolutely no control. You lose all your human senses, and I'd argue it's a huge weakness, too. I mean, it's a weak spot. If it's grabbed, and if it's cut off, I mean, goodbye to your monkey form. So I'd drop this in D tier. Masenko. So I always thought the Masenko was just the explosive demon wave technique, but apparently it's a completely separate technique. So I dropped Masenko in C tier. It seems like it's one of those moves that you can use because it's easy, it's simple, it's reliable. C tier. Next up, we have Hell's Flash. So this is a grapple that goes into, I guess, like a double beam, and that just straight up obliterates your opponent. It hits them like point blank, and it fires more beams out of like craters in the ground, and then they explode. It seems very up close and personal. I'd throw it in B tier. After Image. So this technique you can't really use to defeat your opponent. I mean, maybe to confuse them and like counterattack, but it's not a guarantee, you know, kind of like with the whole solar flare situation. So I'm gonna just drop this in C tier. Time Skip. So Hit's time skip technique is broken, right? It's the ability to leap through time. It acts more like time travel than it does stopping time, which is like a misconception that a lot of fans have. Hit does manage, I believe, to freeze people in time later in the show, but the time skip technique itself allows you to skip ahead into the future. I'm dropping this right into Z tier. Next up, we have Spirit Sword, or Energy Sword, whatever you want to consider it to be. So the Spirit Sword can be extended to ridiculous lengths, and it's literally just making a sword out of your hand. I'd personally put this in B tier. And finally, our last technique, the Sword of Hope. This is basically a combination of Trunks' light sword and the Spirit Bomb. It's literally a Spirit Bomb sword. So considering that you need energy from the Spirit Bomb to use this in the first place, I'm not sure how effective it would be to set up during a battle. By the time you manage to gather energy for the Spirit Bomb and then channel it into the sword, it doesn't seem practical. So for that, I'm dropping it in D tier. Now, I should mention that if we were to rank the Spirit Bomb and the Sword of Hope as an attack alone, minus all the prerequisites that go into it, I would put them both in Z tier. because they are known to have destroyed some of the biggest threats of the universe, so there is no doubt there. But for the sake of using it in an actual battle, it might not be practical. And that's it. That's our technique tier list. If you guys disagree or have your own opinions, let's talk about it in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a like and subscribe. I'm DevilArtemis, and I'll see you in the next one.
I should be like you, Mel.